A young man is sitting in a basement room beneath a crowded festival hall, and he has cut off his own leg and torn out his own eye to be there. He used everything he had left, every piece of the boy he used to be, to reach this single moment and become the thing he once swore to destroy. His body has just become something the world cannot stop, and in the hall above him, the people who called him a devil go about their evening, not knowing what is about to rise up through the floor toward them. That is one afternoon in the middle of Attack on Titan's run, and the show kept writing afternoons exactly like it, quiet and then suddenly total, devastating in the specific way of things that spent years building before anyone saw them arrive. Tonight is a slow walk through the episodes that turned a boy who wanted to see the ocean into the fall of Eren Yeager. Welcome to Anabrain. Let's get started. Section 1. The Boy Who Wanted to See the Ocean. For more than 100 years, the last of humanity lived behind walls. There were 3 of them, one inside the other, each a vast ring of gray stone tall enough to swallow the horizon. The outermost ring was called Wall Maria. Behind it stood Wall Rose, and at the very center, furthest from the danger, stood Wall Sina, where the wealthy and the powerful kept themselves safe. The people inside these rings had been raised on one simple story. Beyond the walls were titans, enormous creatures shaped roughly like people, with no clear purpose except to find humans and eat them. The walls had held against these creatures for a century. Most of the population had quietly decided that the walls would hold forever. Inside that long calm, a kind of forgetting had set in. People farmed, traded, raised families, and grew old without ever seeing a titan with their own eyes. The danger had become a rumor, a thing their grandparents spoke about. Comfort had a way of softening the memory of fear. The world inside the stone was small and lit and predictable, and for almost everyone, that was enough. It was never enough for Eren Yeager. He grew up in Shiganshina, a town that pushed out from the base of Wall Maria like a small tooth, sitting right at the very edge of the outer ring. His father, Grisha, was a doctor, a quiet and careful man who came and went on long trips and kept a locked basement that Eren was never allowed to enter. His mother, Carla, ran the home with warmth and a sharp tongue, the kind of mother who scolded because she loved. There was also Mikasa Ackerman, a girl the family had taken in after a terrible day Eren rarely spoke about, and who never left his side afterward. And there was Armin Arlert, a small, soft-spoken boy who was bullied for being weak, but who carried something none of the other children had. Armin had a book. The book had belonged to Armin's grandfather, and it described the world outside the walls. Not the Titans, the world. It spoke of an ocean, a body of salt water so wide that no person could see across it. It spoke of fields of ice that stretched on without end, of land made entirely of burning water, of plains of sand so vast they swallowed the sun. To the adults of Shiganshina, owning a book like that was close to a crime, because it suggested that the world outside might be worth wanting. To Eren, the book was the most important thing he had ever seen. He and Armin would sit together and talk about going there one day. They would talk about walking out past the wall and standing at the edge of that endless ocean. For Eren, this was not a daydream he could put down. It became the center of who he was. The walls that kept everyone else safe felt to him like the walls of a cage, and the people content to live inside them looked to him like livestock, fed and sheltered and waiting, with no idea that they had given something away. He did not have a clean word for what he wanted. The closest word was freedom. That single word would follow him from this small town all the way to the end of the world, and it would change its meaning so many times along the way that by the end, almost no one could recognize it. Then came the day everything inside the walls had been built to prevent. It was the year 845, and Eren was 9 years old. He and Mikasa were walking home through Shiganshina in the afternoon when the ground shook with a sound like a great heartbeat. The townspeople gathered in the streets and looked up, and what they saw broke 100 years of certainty in a single moment. A face had appeared above Wall Maria. It was the face of a titan, but a titan unlike any in the old stories, tall enough to look over a wall 50 meters high, its skin stripped away to show the red muscle beneath. For one frozen second it simply stood there, steam pouring off its body. Then it drew its leg back and kicked, and a section of the outer gate that had held for a century exploded inward in a storm of stone. The breach let the smaller titans in. They came through the broken gate and began to do the only thing they knew how to do. Across Shiganshina, people who had spent their whole lives believing they were safe discovered in a few minutes that they had never been safe at all. While the town fell apart, a second monster appeared. A titan covered in hard plating like armor, and it charged the inner gate and shattered that too, opening the way deeper into human territory. Eren and Mikasa ran toward their home, and they reached it too late. The house had collapsed. A heavy wooden beam had come down across Carla's legs and pinned her to the ground, and no matter how the two children pulled and dug, they could not lift it. Carla, trapped and calm in the way that only a mother facing the end can be calm, told them to stop. She told them to run. She begged Eren to take Mikasa and go. Behind her, through the broken streets, the Titans were already drawing closer. Hannes arrived then, a soldier the family knew well, a kind man who had spent years drinking on the job because the walls made his job feel like a formality. He ran toward the house to fight the approaching Titan and save Carla. And in the moment that mattered most, he looked up at the creature, at its size and its blank and grinning face, and his courage failed him. He turned back, grabbed the two children, and carried them away from the house. Eren screamed at him to stop, but Hannes did not stop, and so Eren was forced to watch over the man's shoulder as a Titan reached down into the wreckage of his home. It lifted his mother into the air. Carla called out for them even as it happened. The Titan that held her had a strange, fixed smile, a face that seemed almost pleasant, and it closed its hand and its mouth and ended her life in front of her son. That Titan, the one with the gentle smile, would matter again much later, in a way so cruel that it is difficult to describe. And it is among the reasons this story does not allow anyone to look away. A boy of 9 watched his mother die because the adults around him were too afraid, and something in him hardened into a shape it would keep for the rest of his life. As Hannes carried him away from the burning town, Eren made a vow. He would kill them, every last Titan in the world. He would drive them all out, wipe them from the earth, and he repeated this to himself with a hatred far too large for a child to hold. The fall of Shiganshina was only the beginning of the suffering. Wall Maria was abandoned, and the survivors fled inward behind Wall Rose, crowding into land that could not feed them all. The following year, to ease the famine and to reclaim lost territory, the government sent a huge number of those same refugees out beyond the walls in a military operation that was never meant to succeed. Most of them died. The few who survived came back to a world that had used them as a way to reduce the number of mouths it had to feed. Eren absorbed all of this. He watched the people who had lived like cattle continue to live like cattle even after the slaughter, and his contempt for them grew alongside his grief. When he was old enough, Eren joined the Military Training Corps, the group of young recruits known later as the 104th. Mikasa went with him, as she always did, and Armin went too, despite being physically the weakest among them. Eren trained with a fury that set him apart. Where the other recruits wanted safe assignments in the interior, far from any Titan, Eren wanted the opposite. He wanted to join the Survey Corps, the soldiers who rode out beyond the walls and died in large numbers, studying an enemy they could barely understand. To most people, choosing the Survey Corps was choosing to die young. To Eren, it was the only choice that made any sense, because it was the only path that pointed outward, toward the ocean, toward the thing the book had promised, toward freedom. Underneath the rage, that older dream was still alive. He still wanted to see the world. He still wanted to stand at the edge of the saltwater with Armin and look out at something endless. The tragedy that would unfold across his entire life grew from the fact that these two things, the hatred and the dream, were tangled together so tightly that he could never pull them apart. He wanted to be free, and he believed that being free meant destroying whatever stood in his way. And at the start, the thing in his way was the Titans. Later, the thing in his way would change. The desire never would. A child made a promise over his mother's death, that he would destroy every monster in the world. The terrible shape of his life was already set in that promise, because of one fact he could not have known as he was carried away from his burning home. He was about to become a monster himself. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A boy watched his mother taken by a Titan and swore to kill every last one of them, carrying that vow into the army with a hatred far too heavy for his age. What he did not understand was that the power to destroy Titans and the power to become one were the same thing. The next part of his story begins inside the mouth of the creature he hated most. Section 2. The monster he swore to destroy. Years passed inside the walls, and the memory of Shiganshina settled into the bones of the people who survived it. The refugees became residents. The famine eased. The recruits of the 104th grew from frightened children into trained soldiers, drilled in the use of the gear that let them move through the air on steel cables and blades. the only equipment humanity had ever invented that gave a single person a chance against a Titan. Eren learned it well, though never perfectly. Mikasa learned it better than anyone who had ever passed through the core. Armin learned it worst of all, but Armin had a mind that worked in ways the others could not match. And in the war that was coming, a mind would prove more valuable than a strong arm. The recruits believed, as recruits always do, that their training had prepared them. Then the second attack came, and it taught them what their training was actually worth. It was the year 850, 5 years after the fall of Shiganshina, and the place was the city of Trost, one of the districts built into Wall Rose. The new graduates of the 104th were stationed there. The day began as a normal one, and then, without any warning at all, the colossal Titan appeared again. The same towering, skinless monster that had breached Wall Maria half a decade before. It struck the gate of Trost and vanished in a burst of steam, and the smaller Titans poured into the city behind it, exactly as they had poured into Shiganshina. The young soldiers, deployed for the first time against a real enemy, began to die almost immediately. For Eren, the battle that followed was the worst day of his life, since the one that made him a soldier. His squad was cut apart in front of him. The training that was supposed to keep them alive failed against the speed and the size and the sheer number of the Titans, and one by one the people he had trained beside were caught and eaten. In the middle of this chaos, Armin was knocked down, and a Titan took him into its hand and lifted him toward its open mouth. Eren had already lost a leg in the fighting, and he was running low on the gas that powered his gear, and there was no good reason to think he could save anyone. He went anyway. He threw himself at the Titan and shoved Armin out of its mouth at the last possible moment, and in doing so, he put himself in his friend's place. The Titan's jaws closed, and Eren was swallowed, and Armin was left on the rooftop screaming the name of the boy who had just died for him. That should have been the end of Eren Yeager. It was, instead, the moment the whole world began to turn. Inside the dark of the Titan's stomach, surrounded by the half-dissolved bodies of other victims, something woke up. Steam burst out of the creature from the inside. Its flesh tore, and out of the ruined body of the Titan that had eaten him rose a new Titan, 15 meters tall, with long, dark hair and bared teeth, and a fury that no ordinary Titan had ever shown. This new creature did not hunt humans. It hunted Titans. It tore them apart with its bare hands, beat them into the ground, and fought with a rage that looked almost human, because it was human. The Titan was Eren. The boy who had sworn over his mother's body to destroy every Titan in the world had just discovered, in the most violent way possible, that he could turn into the very thing he had vowed to wipe out. When that Titan body finally gave out, the soldiers found Eren alive, whole again, emerging from the back of its neck. His lost limbs had returned. He had no clear memory of what he had done, and the army that found him did not see a miracle. It saw a threat. The plan that came together in the hours afterward was desperate, and it rested entirely on a boy nobody trusted. Armin, thinking faster than the panicking officers around him, proposed that Eren could be used to save the city. There was a massive boulder near the broken gate, large enough to seal the breach if it could be moved. And no machine and no number of men could move it. A Titan could. So the plan was to have Eren transform, lift the boulder, carry it across the ruined city while other soldiers protected him, and plug the hole in the wall with his own hands. It was a plan with almost no chance of working, built on a power Eren could barely control and did not understand. Before he could even try, he nearly died a second time, and this time at the hands of his own people. The soldiers of the garrison, terrified of what he was, aimed their cannons at him and prepared to kill him where he stood. To them, a human who could become a Titan was not a savior. It was the enemy that had been hiding among them, the kind of thing that had brought down the walls in the first place. It took everything Armin had to talk them down, to convince a frightened commander that the boy was a weapon pointed at the Titans rather than at humanity. The hesitation in that moment said something that would echo for the rest of the series. From the very first day his power revealed itself, the people Eren wanted to protect were already afraid of him, already reaching for the trigger. He transformed. He lifted the boulder. He carried it, step by enormous step, through a city full of monsters, and he set it down into the broken gate and sealed Trost. The breach was closed. The city was saved. It was the first time in a century that humanity had taken back ground from the Titans rather than losing it, and a single soldier had done it by becoming a Titan himself. The reward for saving the city was a trial. Eren was put in chains and brought before a military court, where two factions argued over what to do with him. The military police wanted him dissected and destroyed, studied like a specimen and then disposed of. The Survey Corps wanted to keep him, to use his power to push out beyond the walls and finally learn the truth of the world. The court was full of fear, and fear was winning, until Captain Levi, the strongest soldier humanity had, settled the matter in a way that was brutal and effective. He beat Eren in front of the court, bloodying him, knocking out a tooth, demonstrating that the boy could be controlled and contained, and that the Survey Corps was willing to be the ones to do it. The display worked. Eren was handed over to the Survey Corps, and the soldiers who rode out beyond the walls now had something no army had ever had before. They had a Titan of their own. There is a deep and uncomfortable truth sitting under all of this, and the story planted it on purpose at the very start. Eren had spent his childhood defining himself against the Titans. They were the enemy. They were the monsters. They had taken his mother and his home and his sense of safety, and his entire identity had been built around the promise to destroy them. And the moment his story truly began, the power that made him special, the power that made him valuable, the power that would carry him all the way to the end, was the power to become the exact thing he hated. The line between Eren and the monsters was never as clean as he wanted it to be. It was blurred from the first transformation, and over the seasons to come, that blur would widen, until the question of who the real monster was became the only question the story cared about. For now, none of that was visible to him. He had a power, and he had a purpose, and he believed the two fit together perfectly. He thought his ability made him the key to humanity's survival, the chosen weapon that would lead the people out of their cage and into the free world beyond. He carried that belief like a shield, and the next stretch of his life would take that shield and break it across his knees. Because the truth waiting for him was that he was not chosen. He was not unique in the way he imagined, and the world he wanted to save was far stranger and far crueler than the boy who wanted to see the ocean could have guessed. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Eren saved a city by becoming the creature he had sworn to destroy and earned a place among the soldiers who fight beyond the walls, certain that his power made him humanity's chosen weapon. That certainty was about to be tested by an enemy who looked exactly like him. The next part follows the discovery that Eren was never as special or as safe as he believed. Section 3. The Savior Who Was Never Chosen. After the trial, Eren belonged to the Survey Corps, and for the first time, the boy from Shiganshina was where he had always wanted to be. He trained under the soldiers who rode beyond the walls. He learned to control his Titan body, slowly and with many failures. And he carried inside him a quiet certainty that gave him strength through all of it. He believed he was special. He believed his power had been given to him for a reason, that he was the key humanity had been waiting for, the one who would push the Titans back and open the road to the free world outside. That belief was about to be taken apart, piece by piece, and the breaking of it would hurt more than any wound a Titan ever gave him. The first blow came during the expedition that was meant to be his proving ground. The Survey Corps rode out in a wide scouting formation, hundreds of soldiers spread across the open land beyond Wall Rose, with Eren near the center where he could be protected. Somewhere in that formation, a new kind of Titan appeared. It was tall and lean and clearly female in shape, and it did not behave like the mindless creatures the soldiers were used to. It moved with purpose. It ignored easy prey and cut straight through the formation toward the center, toward Eren, killing experienced soldiers as it went with a skill that no ordinary Titan possessed. It could harden its skin, it could call other Titans to it, and it was hunting one person on purpose. The meaning of that hunt was terrible. The soldiers had spent a century believing the enemy was an unthinking force of nature, a disaster with teeth. Now there was a Titan that thought, that planned, that wanted something, and a Titan that thought had to be a person, which meant there was another human somewhere who could do what Eren did, and that person was using the power to kill the very soldiers Eren had sworn to fight beside. Commander Erwin had suspected as much, and had built the entire expedition as a trap to catch this intelligent enemy. The trap nearly worked. It also failed at a cost that left the Corps gutted, and among the dead were the members of the elite squad assigned to guard Eren. Soldiers he had only just begun to trust, torn apart while he hesitated, unsure whether to transform and fight, or whether his power would only make things worse. The female Titan slipped away that day, but the hunt for the person inside it led the soldiers back behind the walls, into the city of Stohess, And there, the second blow landed. The person inside the female Titan was Annie Leonhardt. She had trained in the 104th alongside Eren. She had sparred with him, taught him a few moves, shared the long boredom of cadet life. She was a comrade, and she was the enemy, and Eren was forced to transform and fight her through a city full of civilians. When she was finally cornered, Annie did not let herself be captured and questioned. She sealed herself inside a shell of crystal, locking away whatever she knew, leaving everyone with the sickening understanding that the enemy had been sitting at their table the whole time. The betrayals were not finished. They were barely beginning. Not long after, during a panic over a possible breach in Wall Rose, the Survey Corps found itself regrouped on top of the wall, tired and shaken. In a quiet moment, away from the others, one of Eren's closest friends from training pulled him aside and told him the truth in the flattest, calmest voice imaginable. Reiner Braun explained that 5 years earlier, he and Bertolt Hoover had broken the wall and begun the attack on humanity. Reiner was the armored Titan. Bertolt was the colossal Titan, the two monsters that had destroyed Shiganshina, that had opened the gate that let the Titans pour in, that had set in motion the day Eren's mother was eaten in front of him, had been living among the soldiers for years as ordinary young men. Reiner said it so plainly that Eren at first refused to believe it. Then Bertolt's panicked face confirmed every word. What followed was violence. Mikasa struck at the two of them before they could transform, moving faster than anyone, but she could not finish them in time. Reiner and Bertolt changed into their Titan forms on top of the wall, snatched up Eren and the soldier called Ymir, and the battle scattered across Shiganshina in steam and falling stone. For Eren, the fight was almost beside the point. The ground had shifted under him. The men who had murdered his home were people he had laughed with. The enemy did not come from some far-off darkness. It wore the faces of friends. A pattern was forming, and Eren was slow to see its shape. Every monster had a human inside. Every Titan that had ever terrorized the walls might once have been a person with a name. And his own power, the thing he was so proud of, was the same kind of power that had killed his mother. The clean line between humanity and the monsters, the line his entire childhood vow had been carved into, was dissolving in front of him, and he had no idea yet how far the dissolving would go. The deepest cut came not from an enemy, but from his own history. After the fighting, a new crisis pulled Eren into the heart of the walls and into the secret of how the world really worked. A soldier he had known as Krista Lenz turned out to be living under a false name. Her real name was Historia Reese, and she carried the blood of the true royal family, the family that had ruled from the shadows behind the throne for 100 years. Historia's father, Rod Rice, had Eren and his daughter kidnapped and dragged into an underground chapel, and there, the last pieces of Eren's self-image were pulled away. The Rice family, Eren learned, were the real holders of a power called the Founding Titan, the oldest and most important of all the Titan powers, the one that could control every Titan in existence. That power was supposed to belong to their bloodline, and it had been stolen. Years before, Eren's father, Grisha, the gentle doctor who treated the sick of Shiganshina without asking their rank, had broken into the Rice family's hidden chapel and slaughtered almost all of them, including children, to take the Founding Titan for himself. Then, on the night Wall Maria fell, Grisha had passed both that power and the power of the Attack Titan to his own son, by having his newly transformed Titan child devour him. Eren, as a frightened boy, had eaten his own father, and the act had been wiped from his memory. The savior myth did not survive that chapel. Eren had believed his power was a gift, a sign that he was meant for something. The truth was uglier and smaller. His power had been taken through murder. He was not unique. He was one of a number of people who could become Titans, a piece in a game older than he was, carrying inside him something his father had killed children to obtain. He was not the chosen key to humanity's freedom. He was the end point of a long chain of theft and slaughter. And the more he learned, the less special and the more used he felt. Underground, the crisis reached its peak when Rod Reese tried to take the Founding Titan back and instead became an enormous malformed Titan that began crawling toward the city above. To stop it, Eren had to find something in himself he had never reached before. Struggling with his power, doubting whether he was worth anything at all, he managed for the first time to harden his Titan body into solid armor, and with that hardened fist, he destroyed the threat and saved the people of the interior. Historia took her place as the true queen. The day was won. And Eren, who had ridden out of Shiganshina certain he was the answer to everything, came back understanding that he was a much smaller and stranger thing than he had imagined. The crack in him was deep now, but it was still only a crack. He had learned that the enemy was human, that his friends could be his murderers, that his power was stolen, and that he was not chosen. What he had not yet learned was the truth about the world itself, the truth his father had locked in a basement and promised to show him on the day everything fell apart. That basement was still standing in the ruins of Shiganshina, beyond the broken outer wall, behind enemy titans and old comrades turned enemy. To reach it, the Survey Corps would have to retake the very ground where the story started, and what waited inside would not crack Eren's worldview. It would shatter it completely. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Eren rode out believing he was humanity's chosen weapon, and came back having learned that his friends were his enemies, his power was stolen, and he was no one special at all. Yet the largest truth of his life was still locked in a basement in his ruined hometown. The next part follows the soldiers back to Shiganshina and into the room that ended the world Eren thought he lived in. Section 4. The Truth Beneath the House. For as long as Eren could remember, his father had promised him an answer. Grisha had told his son that the basement of their home in Shiganshina held the truth about the world, that when the time was right, he would unlock it and show him everything. Then, while Maria fell, Grisha vanished, and the basement was buried under a town swarming with titans, out of reach behind the broken outer wall. For years, that locked room sat at the back of Eren's mind like a question he could not put down. The whole long war had been, in part, a war to get back to it. And at last, the Survey Corps was ready to march on Shiganshina, to retake Wall Maria, and to finally open the door Grisha had left closed. The battle to take back Shiganshina was the bloodiest the Survey Corps had ever fought. Reiner and Bertolt were waiting, and so was a new enemy, an ape-like creature called the Beast Titan, intelligent and powerful, who rained boulders down on the soldiers and wiped out most of the Corps in a single afternoon. To break the trap, Commander Erwin led nearly every soldier he had left in a suicide charge across open ground. A charge meant to buy a few seconds of distraction, knowing almost none of them would survive. Most of them did not. The ground was covered with the bodies of the people who had followed Erwin out of the walls, and the dream of seeing the outside world had cost more lives than Eren could count. In the final stretch of that battle, the soldiers managed to bring down Bertolt, but at a price. Armin, Eren's oldest friend, the boy with the book about the ocean, had thrown himself into the plan and been caught in the burning heat of the colossal titan's steam. He was dying, his body ruined. At the same moment, Erwin lay dying too. There was a single dose of the serum that could turn a person into a titan and bring them back from the edge of death, and only one of the two could be saved. The choice tore the survivors apart. In the end, Captain Levi chose to save Armin, and Erwin was allowed to die, and Bertolt was fed to Armin so that the boy could live. The cost of reaching the basement was already almost beyond bearing, and the door had not even been opened yet. When the fighting finally stopped, Eren walked into the ruins of his old home with the key his father had given him on the worst night of his life. He went down into the basement, and what he found there was not a weapon, not a secret that would let humanity win the war, not the thing any of them had hoped for. He found a desk, some books, and a photograph. The photograph was the first crack in everything. It was a real photograph, a thing made by a camera, and no such technology existed anywhere inside the walls. It showed Grisha as a younger man, standing beside a woman and a small child, and the people in it were dressed in clothes the soldiers had never seen. The image meant something simple and enormous. There were people outside the walls, not titans. People, living in a world with machines and cities and history. A world that had been going on the whole time the people inside the walls believed they were the last humans alive. The first thing the basement proved was that everything the people of Paradise had been told about themselves was a lie. The books told the rest. Grisha had filled them with the history of the world, and reading them, Eren learned the truth that would reshape him into the person who would later end so many lives. The Titans were not a natural disaster. The Titans were people. Specifically, they were Eldians, a people who could be turned into mindless giants. And the people living inside the walls were Eldians too, descendants of an old empire that had once ruled much of the world using the power of the Titans, conquering and crushing other nations for centuries. The walled island of Paradise was not humanity's last refuge. It was a corner of a much larger world, and in that larger world, the Eldians were despised, blamed for the cruelties of their ancestors, feared for the monsters they could become. The The nation that had risen to power and now led the hatred against them was called Marley. Grisha himself had come from there, from a district called Liberio, where Eldians were kept in a fenced internment zone as second-class people, made to wear armbands, watched and controlled and treated as something less than fully human. Grisha had grown up in that zone. He had lost his younger sister to its cruelty. He had joined a group that dreamed of restoring Eldia to power, and that path had eventually led him over the sea and into the walls, on a mission to steal the founding titan from the Rice family, the same theft that had ended with him passing his power to his son. The gentle doctor of Shiganshina had been a man with another country, another cause, and another family that Eren had never known existed. There was even more buried in those pages. Grisha had a first son, born in Marley, a boy named Zeke, raised to be a weapon for the very nation that hated his people. Grisha had pushed that child into a life of service and suffering, and had carried the guilt of it for the rest of his days. The father Eren thought he knew, the quiet man who had loved him and shielded him from the world, had lived a whole hidden life, soaked in politics, loss, and blood. The truth of the basement did not only redraw the map of the world, it redrew the man at the center of Eren's childhood. For Eren, the floor of reality dropped away. His entire life had been built on a single, clean idea, that the Titans were monsters, and that destroying them would set humanity free. Now that idea was gone. The monsters were people. His people were hated across the sea. The war was not a war of humans against beasts. It was a war of humans against humans, with his side cast as the villains of a story written long before he was born. The hatred he had carried since he was 9 years old had been pointed at the Titans. Now it had nowhere to rest, because the thing he hated turned out to be wound up with his own blood, his own family, and his own people. The clearest picture of what this truth did to him came later, when the Survey Corps finally reached the place the whole journey had been pointing toward. Beyond the retaken wall, past the ruined town, the soldiers came at last to the ocean. It was the thing Armin and Eren had dreamed of as children, the endless salt water from the Forbidden Book, the symbol of the free world that lay outside the cage. They reached it. They stood in the surf. The water stretched out past the horizon, exactly as the book had promised. And the friends who had survived so much marveled at the salt and the waves and the vastness of it. Eren stood in that same water, and he did not feel free. Looking out across the ocean, he asked the others a question that revealed how completely the basement had changed him. On the other side of all this water, he said, were their enemies. And he wondered aloud whether killing every last one of them, every enemy across the sea, would finally make his people free. The boy who had wanted to see the ocean so that he could be free had reached the ocean and found only a wider battlefield. The dream had not died. It had curdled into something far darker, a freedom that could only be bought by destroying everyone who stood on the other shore. That moment on the beach is where the fall of Eren Yeager truly begins. The earlier blows had wounded his sense of self. The basement killed the world he had lived in and handed him a new one in which his people were marked for hatred, and there was no enemy left to fight except humanity itself. The vow he had made over his mother's body still burned in him, but now it had no clear shape, no single monster to aim at. Sooner or later, a hatred that large and that homeless finds a target. Eren's target would become the entire world, and the path to that target ran straight through one more terrible piece of knowledge, a power inside his own Titan that let him do something no one should ever be able to do. He could see the future, and what he saw there had already begun to pull him forward. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Eren opened the basement his father had promised him and found the truth that the Titans were people. His people were hated across the sea, and the war he had been fighting was a lie. Standing at the ocean he had always dreamed of, he asked whether killing everyone on the far shore would finally make him free. The next part looks at the power that showed him his own future, and the question of whether he ever truly chose any of it. Section 5. The future already written in his mind. Among all the strange powers in this story, the one Eren carried in his attack titan was the strangest, and for a long time nobody understood what it could really do. The 9 titan powers each had their own nature. One gave armored skin, one gave great size, one let its holder build and shape hard structures. The power Eren inherited from his father, the attack titan, seemed at first to be simply a fighter, strong and fast and stubborn. The truth about it was far less simple and far more frightening. The attack titan could reach through time. Its holders could catch glimpses of the memories of the people who would carry the power after them, which meant a person holding it in the present could see fragments of a future that had not yet happened. For most of the series, this ability stayed hidden, even from Eren. He did not understand the thing living inside him. The change came during a quiet ceremony held to honor the survivors of the battle for Shiganshina, a calm gathering far removed from any fight. Historia Reese was there, the young queen with the royal blood, and at one point she and Eren simply shook hands. The contact opened something. Through that touch, a flood of memories poured into Eren's mind, memories that did not belong to the present moment at all. Some were his father's, some were his own, but they were memories of things he had not yet done. What he saw in that flood reshaped him. He saw his father, Grisha, standing in the Reese family's hidden chapel years before, the night of the massacre. He saw the rumbling, the great march of titans across the earth, the thing he himself would one day set loose. And he saw the end of it, his own defeat, after he had wiped out most of the life on the planet. In a single moment, the boy who had spent his life chasing freedom was handed the entire shape of his future, including its horrors and its ending. And from that point forward, he was never quite the same person again. The most disturbing part of this power was not that Eren could see forward, it was what he did by seeing forward. The Titan holders were all connected, even across time, in a hidden place that lay outside the ordinary world, a kind of crossroads where every person who had ever carried the power was joined together. Through that crossroads, Eren did not only watch the future, he reached back into the past. He reached the night his father stood in the Rice Chapel, frozen, unable to bring himself to kill the family in front of him, especially the children, because he was a doctor who had spent his life saving people and could not become a murderer. Into that frozen moment, the future Eren pushed his father forward. He urged Grisha to do the killing. And Grisha, weeping and broken, carried out the massacre, crying out afterward that he had done it because his son had asked him to. The weight of that is hard to take in. The theft that had so disgusted Eren when he first learned of it, his father slaughtering the Rice family to steal the founding Titan, had been set in motion by Eren himself, from years in the future, so that the power would pass down the line and reach him. He had arranged his own inheritance. He was both the result of the chain and the hand that forged it. The man he became reached back and built the boy he had been. There is something even darker buried in this, and it ties the end of the story to its very beginning. Late in everything, Eren admitted that he had also reached back to the day his mother died. The Titan that ate Carla in front of him, the one with the gentle, fixed smile, had been a particular Titan, a woman named Dina who had once been his father's first wife. Eren from the future guided that Titan to his own home, to his own mother, knowing that Carla's death was the single event that had set his entire life into motion. The grief that made him a soldier, the hatred that drove him forward, the path that led to the rumbling, all of it grew from that one terrible afternoon. And Eren engineered the afternoon himself. He killed his own mother to make himself into the person who would do everything else. The smiling Titan from the day Shiganshina fell was never a random monster. It was a piece of a loop that Eren closed with his own hands. This raises the question that the entire story is built around, and it is a question the story chooses never to answer cleanly. Did Eren have a choice? He saw the future, and then he walked toward it, step by step, doing the exact things he had seen himself do. It is possible to read this as a man trapped, a prisoner of a future he had already witnessed, simply performing a script he could not change, with no real freedom at all. It is also possible to read it the opposite way, as a man who saw many possible futures and chose this one, who wanted what he wanted and used his strange power to make sure he got it. The work does not settle the matter. Eren himself, near the end, could not fully explain it. He said that he did not entirely know why he had done what he did, that he had simply kept moving forward, and at the same time, he insisted that he would have done it all, regardless. Both of those things cannot be comfortably true at once, and the story lets them sit unresolved on purpose. This is one of the places where the record is genuinely open, and no amount of analysis can close it, because the author built it to stay open. What can be seen plainly is the change the visions worked on Eren himself. The boy from the early seasons was loud. He screamed, he raged, he threw himself at problems with his whole body. After the truth of the basement and the flood of future memories, that boy faded. In his place came a quiet, hollow, grim man who rarely raised his voice, who looked at his friends with a strange distance, who seemed always to be carrying a heavy thing he could not put down. He stopped arguing. He stopped hoping out loud. He grew his hair long and let his face go still, and the people closest to him began to feel that the Eren they had grown up with was slipping away from them, replaced by someone who already knew how the story ended and had decided to see it through. There is a deep and bitter irony at the center of all this, and it is almost certainly placed there on purpose. Eren is the character who shouts about freedom more than any other. Freedom is his first dream, his guiding word, the thing he reaches for from the moment he opens Armin's book about the ocean. And by the end, he may be the least free person in the entire story, a man chained to a future he had already seen, moving along a path that may have been fixed before he ever set foot on it, unable to stop himself, even as he watched himself become a monster. A boy who wanted nothing in the world except to be free might have spent his whole life as the most bound creature in it. Whether that is a tragedy of fate or a tragedy of choice is the question the story leaves resting in the open air. By now, the shape of the ending was visible to him, sitting behind his eyes every waking hour. He knew what he would do. He knew, in some form, how it would end for him. And rather than turn away from it, he began, quietly and deliberately, to walk toward it. The next step on that path took him across the sea, into the heart of the nation that hated his people, alone, in disguise, and willing to do unspeakable things to his own body to get there. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Eren touched the Queen's hand and saw his entire future, the rumbling and his own death, and learned that he had reached back through time to arrange his own mother's death and his own terrible inheritance. The hot-headed boy went quiet and began walking toward the ending he had already seen. The next part follows him as he vanishes from everyone who loved him and reappears alone behind enemy lines. Section 6. The soldier who vanished into Marley. 4 years passed after the truth of the basement came to light, and in that time the world of the story opened wide. The people of Paradise learned that they lived on an island, that there were other nations across the sea, that machines and ships and weapons far beyond anything inside the walls were waiting out there, in the hands of people who wanted them dead. The Survey Corps changed. The frightened children of the early seasons became hardened adults. The dreamy talk of seeing the ocean gave way to the cold work of preparing for a war against an enemy with far greater power. And somewhere in the middle of all this change, Eren Yeager disappeared. For a stretch of the story, no one knew where he was. His closest friends did not know. The audience did not know. The military leadership gave vague answers. A young man who had once been the center of every battle had simply gone, and the absence sat over everything like a held breath. People who had grown up at his side were left to wonder whether he had been hurt, captured, or worse. And the not knowing said something on its own about how far he had drifted from them. The Eren of the early seasons would never have vanished without a word. This Eren did exactly that. When the truth of his location finally surfaced, it landed hard. Eren was not behind the walls at all. He had crossed the sea and gone into Marley, the nation that led the world's hatred of his people, the homeland of the men who had broken his wall and killed his mother. He had slipped into the very center of the enemy, alone, and he had been living there in disguise for some time. The boy who had once been a victim of an attack from beyond his borders had become the quiet attacker, hidden inside someone else's. How he got there shows just how far he was willing to go. Marley was fighting a long war against another nation in a distant region, a brutal conflict that ground up soldiers by the thousand. Eren used that war as his door. To pass as a wounded Eldian soldier returning from the front, he cut off one of his own legs and gouged out one of his own eyes. His Titan power could heal such wounds in time, which is the only reason a person could even consider it, but the act still required a level of cold resolve that is difficult to sit with. He maimed himself on purpose to look pitiable, to look harmless, to look like exactly the kind of broken young man no one would question. Then he let himself be carried into Marley among the real wounded, hiding in plain sight as one of the people he intended to destroy. He was taken to a hospital in the Liberio internment zone, the same fenced district his father had grown up in, where Eldians were kept behind walls of their own, made to wear armbands, watched and controlled by the nation that used their children as weapons. In the chaos of the ward, a frightened soldier knocked Eren to the floor, and a young boy stepped in to help him up. The boy noticed that Eren was wearing his Eldian armband on the wrong arm, and quietly corrected it before anyone else saw. That boy was Falco Grice, a warrior candidate, a child being raised by Marley to one day inherit a Titan power and fight for the country that despised him. Falco helped the strange wounded soldier without knowing who he was, and in doing so, he became one of the most important and most painful threads in this part of Eren's story. Eren gave a false name, calling himself Kruger, and he played his role with patience. He pretended to have lost his memory so that the hospital would not discharge him and send him away. He used the kind boy who had helped him as a messenger, asking Falco to carry letters out of the internment zone, telling him they were meant for family so that the hospital would not learn he was only pretending to be ill. The letters were really meant for his allies from the Survey Corps, who had crossed the sea and were waiting in the shadows for his signal. Through a child's innocent kindness, Eren kept his lines of communication open and his plan moving forward, and the child never suspected a thing. The strangest and most human part of this whole stretch is what happened inside Eren during it. He was living among the people he had already decided to kill, and instead of letting that distance make them faceless to him, he let himself see them clearly. He sat with wounded Eldian soldiers and listened to them. He watched the children of the internment zone play and dream of becoming heroes for a country that would never truly accept them. He spent real time with Falco, and there were moments when he looked at the boy with something close to tenderness, telling him in a roundabout way that they were not so different. Two people who had been born into a world that hated them and had no say in it. Eren did not turn the enemy into monsters in his mind. He understood, fully and painfully, that they were people exactly like him, with families and fears and small hopes, and he planned to crush them anyway. That contradiction, the deep empathy sitting right beside the willingness to commit mass murder, is the hardest thing to hold about him, and it is the truest thing too. The story builds a careful mirror in all of this, and it is worth sitting with slowly. Years before, men from a foreign nation had hidden themselves inside Eren's homeland, lived among his people as friends, and then brought the walls down and opened the way for slaughter. Eren had been a small child on the receiving end of that, watching his world end because strangers had infiltrated it. Now he was the stranger. He had hidden himself inside the enemy's homeland, lived among them as a harmless, wounded soldier, befriended their children, and he was preparing to bring the walls down on them in turn. The victim had become the thing that had once destroyed him. The story does not present this as a clean revenge. It presents it as a wheel that keeps turning, crushing whoever happens to be underneath it in any given generation. And Eren had decided to grab the wheel and turn it himself. The man who walked through Liberio in those weeks was almost unrecognizable as the boy from Shiganshina. He was calm in a way that was unsettling rather than peaceful. He had seen the ending. He had maimed his own body to reach this place. He had killed his own mother through the long reach of time, arranged his own inheritance, and accepted a future drenched in blood. There was no rage left on the surface of him, only a still and patient certainty, the look of a person carrying out a task he had stopped questioning. Whatever warmth remained in him, and there was clearly some, lived underneath that stillness, and only showed in small moments, a gentleness toward a child, a flicker of grief he would not name. All of it was moving toward a single point. Marley was preparing a great public event, a festival in Liberio, where the powerful figures of the nation would gather, and a member of the ruling family would give a speech to the world. Eren knew about it. He had positioned himself for it. He was waiting, hidden among the very people who would be standing in the crowd, for the moment to reveal himself and begin the work he had crossed the sea to do. The boy who had once stood in a crowd in Shiganshina and watched a monster appear over his wall was about to become the monster appearing over someone else's. When that moment came, the friends who had spent 4 years not knowing where he was would finally see him again, and they would understand at last that the Eren they had lost was not coming back. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Eren vanished from everyone who loved him and reappeared alone inside the enemy's homeland, having maimed his own body to get there, befriending the very children he meant to destroy while feeling their humanity fully. The victim of one infiltration had become the author of another. The next part follows the day he revealed himself in Liberio and brought the walls down on a city that was not his own. Section 7. The day the walls fell on someone else. The city of Liberio had dressed itself up for a celebration. Flags hung from the buildings. Music drifted through the streets. Families walked together in their best clothes. Children ran between the legs of the crowd, and vendors sold food along the route to the Great Hall, where the most important event of the day would take place. For the Eldians of the internment zone, the people kept behind their own fences and made to wear armbands. The festival was a rare day when the world seemed to soften, when they could stand among the proud nation of Marley and feel, for a few hours, almost a part of it. Soldiers from many countries had come to watch. Dignitaries and officials filled the seats near the stage. And somewhere in that happy, crowded city, a wounded young man with a false name sat waiting for the right moment to end thousands of lives. To understand the size of what was about to happen, it helps to understand why the festival mattered so much in the first place. Marley was a powerful nation, but its power rested on the Titans, and the Titans were beginning to look outdated against the new weapons that other countries were building. The family that had quietly guided Marley's story for generations, the Tiber family, decided it was time to remind the world of the old fear. Their head, a man named Willie Tiber, would step out of the shadows in front of the gathered nations and tell a story so frightening that the whole world would agree to follow Marley into war. The festival was the stage for that story. Everything had been arranged around it. There was a hidden layer beneath the celebration that very few people knew about. Willie Tiber did not expect the day to go smoothly. He and the Marleyan commander, Theo Magath, had already guessed that enemy spies from Paradis had crossed the sea and slipped into Liberio. Rather than try to catch them quietly, Willie chose a colder plan. He would make himself bait. He would stand in the open, knowing he might be killed, because a public attack on the festival, with Eldian civilians dying alongside him, would horrify the watching nations and unite them against Paradis even faster than a speech ever could. Willie had decided that his own death, and the deaths of many innocent people of his own kind, would be useful. He walked toward the stage as a man planning to be martyred. Beneath that stage, and behind the Great Hall, Eren had been moving his pieces into place. His allies from across the sea were positioned through the city, soldiers of the Survey Corps and a group of Eldians who had turned against Marley from the inside. The boy he had befriended, Falco, was being used one last time. Eren had asked Falco to bring someone to him, quietly, into a basement room behind the stage. The person Falco brought was Reiner Braun. The meeting between Eren and Reiner in that basement is one of the quietest and most chilling scenes in the whole story. Reiner was stunned to see Eren in Liberio, in the heart of Marley, 4 years after he had last laid eyes on him. He braced for hatred. He expected the boy whose home he had destroyed, whose mother he had helped kill, to come at him with all the rage of the early seasons. Instead, Eren spoke to him calmly, almost gently. He told Reiner that he finally understood him. He understood what it was to live among people you intended to destroy, to befriend them, to feel their humanity, and to go through with the destruction anyway. Eren said that the two of them were the same. He did not scream. He did not strike. He sat with the man who had ruined his life and told him, with something close to sympathy, that he no longer blamed him because he had become the same kind of creature. Then he reached out and offered Reiner his hand. Above them, in the packed hall, Willie Tiber began to speak, and his words pulled the curtain off 100 years of lies. He told the gathered nations the old, familiar history of the ancient Eldian Empire and its centuries of cruelty, the conquering, the use of titans to crush other peoples. He reminded them of the Great Titan War and of Marley's hard-won victory over the monsters. And then he revealed something even his own people had not known. The fall of Eldia a century ago had not come purely from outside. The old king, Karl Fritz, had conspired with the Tiber family to bring his own empire down from within, to retreat to the island of Paradise and leave the rest of the Eldians behind to be ruled and despised by Marley. Willie laid this bare in front of the world, casting the people of Paradis, and one young man in particular, as the great remaining danger. He warned them of Eren Yeager and of the sleeping titans inside the walls of Paradis, and he called upon every nation present to join together and destroy the island before it destroyed them. At the exact moment Willie called the world to war, Eren let go of his patience. Down in the basement, his offered hand became a fist of a different kind. He transformed. The attack titan erupted out of the building directly behind the stage, 15 meters of muscle and fury bursting up through stone and timber. And the first thing it did was reach down and crush Willie Tiber where he stood. The image of that eruption is the heart of this entire section, and it deserves to be sat with slowly, because the story built it on purpose to mirror the moment that made Eren who he is. Years before, a small boy had stood in the streets of Shiganshina and looked up to see a monstrous titan appear without warning above his wall, bringing death to a city full of people who thought they were safe. Now that same boy, grown, had become the monster appearing without warning above another city full of people who thought they were safe. The colossal titan had once risen over Eren's home. Eren now rose over someone else's home in almost the same shape. The victim had completed his journey into the role of the attacker, and the story framed it so clearly that no viewer could miss it. The wheel that had crushed Shiganshina was turning again, and Eren was the one turning it. What followed was not a battle in any clean sense. It was a slaughter. After killing Willy, the attack titan turned on the crowd, on the officials and soldiers and civilians packed into the hall and the surrounding area, and it began to kill them in great numbers. Steam and screaming filled the festival that had been so peaceful an hour before. The people who had dressed up for a celebration ran and died. Eren did this deliberately and with a clear head. He wanted to cripple Marley's leadership in a single blow, and he wanted to terrify the watching world, and he did not let the presence of ordinary people stop him. The calm he had shown Reiner in the basement was the same calm he carried into the killing. There was no rage in it. There was only purpose. Among the people caught in that horror were children, and the story made sure the audience saw them. Gabby Braun, a young warrior candidate full of pride and patriotism, watched her friends die in the chaos. Two of those friends, two children named Udo and Zofia, were killed in front of her. Gabby was the same age Eren had been when his own world was destroyed by a sudden attack, and in that moment, the story planted its cruelest seed. A new child was being filled with the same grief and the same hatred that had once filled Eren, by an attack carried out by the very person that grief had turned into. The cycle was reproducing itself in real time, making a fresh enemy out of a fresh victim. And Eren, who knew exactly how this felt, did it anyway. The Marleyan side was not without its own monsters to answer with. Willy's sister, Lara Tiber, had been hiding a titan power of her own, and she transformed into the Warhammer Titan, a strange and powerful form that could create weapons and hard structures out of nothing. She thanked her dead brother for playing his part, and then she went after Eren. The fight was fierce. The Warhammer Titan trapped Eren, generated a great hammer, and struck his Titan's head clean off, defeating him and standing over him to ask for his final words. For a moment, it looked as though Eren's long march toward the future he had seen would end on a festival stage in the enemy's homeland. It did not end, because his old comrades had come for him. The Survey Corps had crossed the sea, and they descended on Liberio in the middle of the chaos. Mikasa, who had spent 4 years not knowing where Eren was, struck the Warhammer Titan in a surprise attack and saved him at the last second. The soldiers Eren had grown up with poured into the fight, moving through the air on their cables exactly as they had once moved through the streets of Trost. Except now, the enemy beneath them was not a horde of mindless giants, but a city of human beings. Levi saved Eren a second time, cutting down another enemy titan before it could finish him. The friends fought to protect a man who had just committed a massacre, and they did it because he was still Eren, still the boy they loved, even as the thing he had done sat heavy on all of them. Eren did not waste the chance his friends bought him. He found Lara Tiber where she hid, and after a struggle he consumed the Warhammer Titan, taking its power for himself, adding another stolen ability to the collection of stolen abilities he already carried. Another life ended to make him stronger. The pattern that had defined him since the chapel under the Rice family, power gained through death, repeated once more, and he accepted it without a flicker. For the friends fighting beside him, the day was a kind of grief disguised as a victory. They won the battle. They captured Zeke, the Beast Titan, who was secretly Eren's half-brother and a key part of the plan. They held the ground long enough to escape, but they had done it by becoming the attackers, by raining death on a city of civilians, by turning into the thing they had once fought against. Jean, Connie, Armin, all of them carried out the work with hollow faces, following Eren into a war that had quietly made them the villains of someone else's story. The clean fight for survival they had signed up for as children was gone. In its place was a darker thing they could barely look at, and at the center of it was a friend who no longer seemed to need them, who had planned all of this without telling them, who had become someone they could not reach. The retreat from Liberio carried one more blow, and it landed in the place least prepared for it. As the Survey Corps pulled back and lifted off in their airship, escaping with Zeke and their lives, two children slipped aboard unseen. Gabby, the girl who had just watched her friends die, and Falco, the boy Eren had used, had followed the enemy onto their own craft. Gabby, burning with the exact hatred the attack had lit in her, found a rifle and opened fire inside the airship. Her shot struck Sasha Blouse. Sasha had been one of the warmest souls among the soldiers, a girl remembered most for her endless love of food, for laughter in the darkest moments, for being the kind of person who made the war feel survivable. She bled out on the floor of the airship, surrounded by the friends who could not save her. And her final word was about meat, a small joke from a dying girl that broke everyone who heard it. She was the first of the old group to fall in this new war, and the cruelty of it was perfectly shaped. Sasha was killed by a child who had been turned into a weapon of hatred by the very massacre that Eren had chosen to carry out. The cycle Eren understood better than anyone, the cycle that had made him, had now reached back and taken one of his own friends through the hands of a brand new Eren, born that same afternoon. The meaning of this section sits in that final, terrible symmetry. Eren had become the colossal titan rising over the wall, the sudden monster that destroys a peaceful city. In doing so, he had created a new, grieving child, and that child had killed one of his closest friends within hours. Violence in this story does not stay where it is aimed. It splashes outward and comes home. Eren knew this. He had lived the whole pattern from the inside, as the small boy watching his mother die, and he had decided that the only way to protect the people he loved was to become the source of the pattern rather than its victim. The result was the death of someone he loved, killed by the cycle he had personally fed. Whatever else can be said about him, he was not a man who failed to understand the cost. He understood it completely, and he paid it with other people's lives, and now with one of his own. By the time the airship carried the survivors back across the sea, there was no path left that led to peace. The world had its villain. The nations would unite against Paradis, exactly as Willy Tybur had planned, and his death had made it certain. Eren had what he wanted, the Warhammer Titan added to his power, his brother Zeke in hand, and the world set on a collision course with the island. The boy who had dreamed of seeing the ocean had crossed it to bring down the walls on strangers, and he had come back colder, stronger, and more alone than ever. The only thing left ahead of him was the power that could end everything, and the brother who held the other half of the key to it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Eren rose over a peaceful city the way a monster once rose over his own, slaughtering a festival, taking another titan's power, and lighting in a grieving child the same hatred that had made him, a hatred that killed his friend Sasha within hours. The world now had its villain, and the road led only deeper. The next part follows Eren and his brother Zeke, and the moment the full power of the Founding Titan finally came within reach. Section 8. The Weight of the Founding Titan. When the airship carried Eren home from Liberio, it carried a problem that the island of Paradis did not know how to solve. The young man who had once been the symbol of humanity's hope had returned as something colder and more dangerous. A soldier who had launched a massacre across the sea without the full agreement of his own leaders, who answered questions with silence, who looked at the people who loved him as though they were already part of his past. The military that had raised him did the only thing it could think to do. It put him in a cell. And while Eren sat behind bars, calm and patient as ever, the island around him began to tear itself in two. The split ran along a simple and terrible line. On one side stood the careful leaders, the soldiers who wanted to slow down, to think, to find some way through the coming war that did not require becoming a monster. On the other side stood a growing crowd of people who had decided that Eren was right, that the world hated them and would never stop, and that the only safety lay in striking first and striking hard. These followers took a name from the man they worshipped. They called themselves the Yeagerists, and they were led by a soldier named Flock, a survivor of the Corps who had watched too many friends die for a world that wanted them dead and had stopped believing in mercy. The Yeagerists did not win their power through honest argument. They won it through a hidden weapon that had been planted long before, quietly, by Eren's brother. Zeke had a strange ability tied to his spinal fluid, a fluid that could turn ordinary Eldians into titans whenever he commanded it. Some of that fluid had been secretly mixed into wine and served to the highest leaders of the Paradis military at a gathering, which meant that those leaders now carried inside their own bodies the means of their destruction. With that threat hanging over everyone, the Yeagerists seized control of the island. The old leadership was scattered. Some were arrested. Some became fugitives, hunted by the very soldiers they had once commanded. Friends who had bled together for years found themselves on opposite sides of a divide that grew wider by the day. Behind all of this stood a plan that almost no one had heard spoken aloud. A plan so heavy that the people who knew of it could barely look at one another. Zeke had spent years building toward it. He called it the Euthanasia Plan, and its goal was the gentle end of the entire Eldian people. Zeke believed that the Eldians were cursed, that their existence brought only suffering, that the cycle of hatred and titans and war would never end as long as there were Eldians left to be hated. His answer was not to fight that cycle but to close it forever, by using the power of the founding titan to make every Eldian unable to have children. No more births, no more titans, no more victims. Within a few generations, the Eldian people would simply fade out of the world, quietly and without pain, and the long nightmare would be over. To Zeke, this was the kindest thing anyone could do. He had decided that the most loving act left in the world was to end his own people, so that no more of them would ever have to be born into a life of suffering. For the plan to work, two things had to come together. The power of the founding titan lived inside Eren, but Eren could not fully use it on his own, because that power answered only to the royal bloodline, and Eren did not carry royal blood. Zeke did. Their father had given Eren the power, and through their shared blood, Zeke held the key that could unlock it. As long as the two brothers were in contact, Eren could reach the full strength of the founder. So the entire war was bending toward a single physical moment. The moment when Eren and Zeke would touch, and everyone on every side knew it. The Marleyans wanted to kill one of the brothers before that moment could happen. The Yeagerists wanted to force the moment into being. And the old friends of the Survey Corps were caught somewhere in the middle, unsure whether the boy they loved was about to save them or doom them. The not knowing was its own kind of agony. Some of Eren's oldest friends believed that he would never go through with Zeke's plan to erase their people, that whatever he was planning, he was still on their side in some twisted way. Armin, who knew Eren better than almost anyone, guessed that Eren intended to use the founding titan not to end the Eldians gently, but to do something far more violent. And even that darker guess felt safer than the alternative. They followed him on faith, a faith stretched almost to breaking, while others among them could not bring themselves to trust a man who had already shown how far he would go. The two brothers at the center of all this had grown up in worlds that could not have been more different. Zeke had been born in Marley, handed over as a small child to become a warrior for the nation that hated his kind, shaped by cruelty into a weapon and a strategist. Eren had been born inside the walls, raised by the same father in a quiet town, kept ignorant of the wider world until the basement tore that ignorance away. They shared a father, a bloodline, and a great deal of pain, and for a brief time it seemed they might share a purpose. Zeke had reached out to his younger brother, believing he had found a partner who understood his vision of mercy. He did not understand, until it was far too late, who his brother had truly become. The moment everything had been building toward arrived during a great battle in Shiganshina, the same ruined district where so much of this story keeps returning. Marley launched a counterattack to stop the brothers from meeting, throwing its titans and its soldiers against the Yeagerists who were defending Eren. The fighting was a desperate, churning mess of steam and gunfire and falling bodies, and through all of it ran a single, frantic race. One side fought to push Eren and Zeke into contact. The other fought to kill one of them before that contact could happen. For a long, terrible stretch, it could have gone either way. What broke the deadlock was a child. Gabby Braun, the girl from Liberio whose friends had died in Eren's massacre, who had crossed the sea burning with the exact hatred that the attack had lit in her, took up an anti-Titan rifle from a fallen soldier and fired. The shot struck Eren and tore his head clean from his body. His severed head flew through the air, and any ordinary person would have died in that instant. Eren was not ordinary. His Titan power kept the smallest spark of him alive inside that flying head, and Zeke, whose years of baseball as a boy in Marley had given him the reflexes for exactly this, reached out and caught his brother's head in his hand. The two conditions met in that grip. The carrier of the founder and the blood of the royal line joined, and in the space of a single heartbeat, both brothers vanished from the battlefield and woke somewhere outside the ordinary world. The place they woke in is one of the eeriest images in the whole story, and it is worth lingering on slowly. The brothers stood in a vast, pale emptiness, a realm that existed outside of time itself, where a great structure of glowing strands stretched off in every direction. Those strands were connections, links to every Titan that had ever lived or would ever live, threads reaching into the past and the future at once. At the heart of this place dwelled a single, quiet figure, a girl who had been there for 2,000 years, alone, working in silence. She was Ymir Fritz, the first of all the Titans, the source from which every Titan power had flowed, and she was the one who truly held the strength that Eren and Zeke had come to claim. Zeke believed he held the advantage, and at first he did. As a descendant of the royal family, his will commanded Ymir, while Eren, despite carrying the founder, had no such authority. The old promise that the royal line had made long ago, the promise never to use this power for war, hung in this place as a kind of chain, and Zeke used it. Ymir bound Eren in those chains, holding him in place, while Zeke calmly explained that things would now go his way. He told Eren the time had come. He urged his brother to give the command, to ask Ymir to make the Eldians unable to bear children, to let the rumbling wait and the gentle ending begin. Everything Zeke had worked toward had narrowed to this one quiet request. Eren refused. He did not shout it. He simply said, with the flat certainty that had become his whole manner, that he could never go along with such a plan. And then he revealed the thing that pulled the floor out from under his brother. Eren had never shared Zeke's dream of mercy. He had only pretended to, from the very beginning, manipulating Zeke and the people around him into believing they were partners, so that he could be carried to this exact place and this exact power. The brother Zeke thought he had found had been using him the entire time, the way Eren used everyone, gently and without apology, toward an end only Eren could see. Unwilling to give up, Zeke tried a different path. He pulled Eren through the memories of their father, Grisha, hoping that by showing his little brother the full, sad shape of their father's life, he could change Eren's heart, could prove to him that all this striving and suffering and reaching for freedom led nowhere, and that the kindest thing was to let it all end. The journey through Grisha's past did change something, but not what Zeke hoped. As the two brothers moved through their father's memories, they arrived at the night in the Rice Chapel. And there, the truth came out plainly. Eren had been the one who pushed Grisha to slaughter the royal family. The boy standing chained in this timeless place had reached back through the years and bent his own father into a murderer. Grisha, in the memory, turned and saw his older son, the child he had failed and abandoned to Marley, and he wept and apologized for the kind of father he had been. Then he begged Zeke to stop Eren. That plea broke something in Zeke. He had come into this place believing he was guiding his idealistic younger brother toward peace. He left it understanding that his brother was something he could not steer, that their father's final wish had been for Zeke to halt the very plan Zeke had spent his life enabling. The grief of it nearly unmade him. In that shaken state, he made his last attempt, commanding Ymir directly to carry out the sterilization, to end the Eldian people then and there. Eren did not let it stand. He forced his way out of the chains that bound him, tearing himself loose at the cost of 2 of his fingers, and ran after Ymir as she moved toward the heart of the place, the point from which her power flowed into the world. He reached her. He asked her to lend him her strength, and at first she ignored him entirely, drawn instead toward Zeke and the royal blood that had ruled her for so long, the only kind of will she had ever been allowed to obey. What Eren said next changed everything, and it reached toward a truth the story would not fully explain until the very end. He asked Ymir whether she had been the one to call him here. He wondered aloud whether she had been waiting in this silent place for 2,000 years for someone to come. At those words, the ancient girl who had served without complaint for 20 centuries began to cry. Eren urged her to stop obeying, to set aside the duty that had bound her since the day she was enslaved, to act for once on her own will, rather than the will of the people who owned her. He offered her something no king had ever offered her, which was a choice. Ymir gave Eren her power. The deeper reason why, the thing she truly recognized in that moment, and the thing she was truly waiting for, would stay hidden until the story's final hours, and the work holds that mystery back on purpose. What mattered in the moment was the result, the full strength of the founding Titan, the strength that had kept Paradise safe for 100 years and held the fate of the world inside it, passed into Eren's hands. Back in the wreckage of Shiganshina, on the ordinary battlefield, Eren's severed head reconnected to his body. The ground shook. The great wall that had protected the island for a century began to crumble, and out of it poured a horde of colossal titans, thousands upon thousands of them, the sleeping giants that had always been the island's shield. As they emerged, Eren's body reshaped itself into something monstrous and new, a vast skeletal form, his small human face set atop an enormous spine that stretched out across the ruined land. The deterrent that had kept his people alive for generations was no longer a shield. It had become a weapon, and the weapon was marching. The title of this part of his story carries a double meaning, and both halves are true. Eren now held the most powerful thing that had ever existed, the ability to command every Titan in the world, to reshape memory itself, to decide who lived and who died on a scale no person should ever hold. That was the weight of the founding Titan as power. There was also the weight of it as burden. The boy who had spent his whole life screaming for freedom now carried the chains of an entire people in his hands, and he had chosen to use that power not for the gentle ending his brother begged for, but for the opposite, for a death so vast it is hard to hold in the mind. The contrast between the two brothers is the quiet heart of this whole stretch, and it is worth sitting with. Zeke looked at the endless suffering of his people and chose what he believed was mercy, a soft and final closing of the door. Eren looked at the same suffering and chose mass death for everyone else, in the name of his own people's freedom and, as he would later admit, in the name of a want inside himself that he could never fully explain. One brother wanted to end the pain by ending his own kind. The other wanted to end it by ending the world that caused it. Neither of them was right in any clean way, and the story does not pretend otherwise. It simply shows two damaged men, sons of the same broken father, reaching opposite and terrible conclusions, and it lets the weight of both sit unanswered. There was no turning back now. The wall was down. The Titans were moving. The future Eren had glimpsed years ago, with his hand in the Queen's, had arrived exactly as he had seen it. Whatever doubts his friends still carried, whatever hopes they still clung to, the thing they had feared most was no longer a possibility to be argued over. It had begun. Across the sea, in cities full of people who had no idea what was coming, the ground was about to start shaking. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Eren let his brother believe they were partners, then reached the ancient source of all Titan power and asked her to choose freedom, claiming the full strength of the founding Titan and refusing Zeke's gentle ending in favor of something far worse. The wall fell, the giants poured out, and the march began. The next part follows those 4 days, the destruction they brought, and the unlikely alliance that rose to stop him. Section 9. 4 days that ended the world. Across the sea, far from the island of Paradis, the morning began like any other. In the great cities of Marley and in the smaller nations scattered around them, people woke and went about their lives. Markets opened. Children walked to school. Soldiers cleaned their weapons and spoke of the war that everyone expected. A war against the island of monsters. A war they believed they would fight on their own terms and in their own time. None of them knew that the ground beneath their feet had only days left. None of them had any way to understand the size of the thing that was already moving toward them. The world was about to learn what the people inside the walls had always known, which was that the walls had never been walls at all. They were a weapon, sleeping, and the weapon had just woken up. The thing that woke it stood in the ruins of Shiganshina. Eren, in his new and monstrous form, gave the command, and the hardened skin that had held the wall titans frozen for 100 years melted away. Out of the 3 great rings of stone that had protected Paradis for generations came the giants. There were hundreds of thousands of them, each one as tall as the colossal titan that had once destroyed Eren's home. An army so vast that no number can really hold it. They climbed out of the crumbling walls in their endless ranks, and they began to walk, and the earth shook with the weight of their steps. This was the rumbling, the doomsday that the island had carried inside its own defenses all along, and Eren had set it loose upon the world. The first thing the march reached was the danger that Eren had used to justify it. The nations of the world, led by Marley, had gathered a great combined force at the Marleyan mainland. A fleet and an army assembled for the express purpose of invading Paradis and wiping out the Eldians once and for all. That force represented the immediate threat to everyone Eren loved. When the wave of Titans reached the Marleyan port, it swept that gathered fleet and army away in a matter of moments, crushing the assembled might of the world before it could ever set sail. In the space of a short time, the actual military threat to Paradis had been erased. The danger was gone. The thing Eren claimed to be protecting his people from no longer existed, and Eren did not stop. This is the moment the whole story turns on, the line that separates defense from something with no name gentle enough to soften it. Having destroyed the army that threatened his island, Eren could have halted the march. He could have stood the Titans down, having achieved the safety he said he wanted. Instead, the giants kept walking. They moved inland, past the ruined port, into the cities and towns and farmland of a continent full of people who posed no threat to anyone, and they kept on flattening everything in their path. The act that began as a shield became, in that decision to continue, an act of annihilation. Whatever Eren told himself and others about protecting his people, the march that followed the destruction of the fleet was no longer about protection. It was about ending the world that had hated them, all of it, down to the ground. The scale of what the Titans did is difficult to take in slowly, which is the only honest way to take it in. They walked shoulder to shoulder in a line that stretched across the land, each step bringing down buildings, each body radiating a heat so intense that the air itself became a weapon. Cities that had stood for centuries were turned to rubble and ash in minutes. Forests burned. Rivers boiled. The ground behind the march was left flat and smoking, scrubbed of everything that had once lived there. People ran, and there was nowhere to run, because the line of Titans was too wide and too tall and too endless to escape. The march covered thousands of kilometers of the world, and behind it lay only ruin and silence. The story refused to let any of this stay abstract, and that refusal is part of what makes it so heavy. Among the countless people crushed beneath the march was a boy named Ramsay, a poor child from a hard place who, earlier in the story, had crossed paths with two of the warriors and shown a small, ordinary humanity. When the Titans came, Ramsay tried to flee with his younger brother, and the two of them were crushed together beneath an enormous foot. Two children who had done nothing to anyone, ended without a thought. The story showed this on purpose. It showed the faces, the small lives, the people who had no part in the ancient wars between Eldia and Marley, because Eren's plan treated all of them as one undifferentiated enemy, and the work wanted the weight of that to land. Every step of the march fell on someone like Ramsay. There is a sorrow buried in the Titans themselves that the story handles with a careful, quiet hand. The Wall Titans were not born monsters. Long ago, they had been ordinary Eldians, people turned into giants by the old king who built the walls, their bodies frozen into the stone for 100 years. Now they walked again, under Eren's command, doing the killing his will demanded of them. What they felt as they marched, whether anything of the people they had once been remained awake inside those vast bodies, the story leaves mostly unspoken, and that silence is its own kind of weight. They were victims made into the instruments of further slaughter, and the boy directing them had once been a victim too. At the head of the march moved Eren, in the strange and terrible form the founding power had given him. His small, human face set high atop an immense skeletal spine, carried forward at the front of his army of giants. The boy who had stood in a field with his best friend, dreaming of an ocean he might one day see, had crossed that ocean and become the single most destructive force the world had ever known. He did not rage, he did not gloat. He simply led, calm and silent, walking across the world and ending it with the same flat certainty he had carried since the day he saw his own future. Even as his body marched, part of Eren remained in the timeless place outside the world, and there he spoke with his friends. Pulled into that strange realm, the people who had grown up beside him tried to reach him, to argue, to understand. And Eren answered them in his quiet way, holding to the belief that had carried him this far. He believed that the world would never let his people live, that the hatred aimed at the Eldians would never end, and that the only way to give the people he loved a future was to take the future away from everyone else. The apparition of Ymir, the ancient girl who had given him her power, lingered near him in that place, a sign of the strange cooperation that had made all of this possible. The argument at the center of the rumbling deserves to be laid out fairly, because the story takes it seriously even as it shows the horror. Eren and the people who supported him had real reasons for their despair. They had learned that the whole world saw them as devils, that nations were gathering to destroy them, that no treaty or speech or act of goodwill had ever made the hatred go away. From inside that despair, Eren's logic had a cold sense to it. If the world will always try to kill your people, then perhaps the only safety is a world too broken to try. That was the case he made, and the story sets against it the oldest counter-argument there is, which is that this exact logic, the logic of wiping out a whole people because they might one day threaten you, is the very logic that created the cycle of hatred in the first place. In choosing it, Eren did not break the cycle. He became its largest expression. He had spent his life hating the monsters, and he had grown into the greatest monster the world had ever seen. For the friends who had loved him, watching the march was a grief beyond anything the war had asked of them before. These were people who had shared meals with Eren, who had fought at his side, who had carried his dream of the ocean as their own. Now they watched him murder the world, city by city, child by child, and they came slowly and painfully to the only conclusion left. Eren had to be stopped. The The boy they loved was killing billions, and loving him did not change what had to be done. To save what was left of the world, they would have to find a way to end him, and the knowledge of that sat on them like a stone. Out of that necessity came the most unlikely thing in the entire story. The soldiers of Paradis, who had spent years fighting and dying against the warriors of Marley, found themselves standing beside those very enemies. Mikasa, Armin, Jean, Connie, and the broken but unbroken Levi joined hands with Reiner, who had destroyed Eren's home, with Annie, who had killed so many of their comrades, with Peak and the others who had been their bitterest foes. The people who had every reason in the world to hate each other put that hatred down, because the thing in front of them was larger than any of their old wounds. To stop the end of the world, the two sides of a generations-long war became, for a little while, a single, desperate alliance. The cost of that alliance was its own quiet drama. There was no warmth in it at first, only mistrust, swallowed rage, and a shared and unbearable grief. The warriors and the soldiers eyed each other across a gap built from years of killing, and they crossed that gap anyway, because there was no one else left to do the work. The bitter irony of it is impossible to miss. Eren's atrocity had accomplished, in a few days, the thing that no peace talk and no act of goodwill had ever managed in 100 years. It had made enemies into allies. The only thing that could unite the people who hated the Eldians with the Eldians themselves was the need to stop an Eldian from killing them all. Peace came, in a twisted and temporary form, and it came at the price of the world. The effort to reach Eren cost the Alliance dearly even before the final battle. They had a flying boat, a craft built by foreign engineers, the one thing that could carry them across the ruined continent to the place where they might be able to stop him. Getting that boat into the air took everything they had. Hanji, who had led them through their darkest hours, gave her own life to buy the time, turning alone to face a wave of oncoming titans so that the boat could rise, holding them off until the heat and the numbers overwhelmed her. She passed her leadership to Armin and went to her death with her eyes open. One more friend spent in the long effort to undo what Eren had done. There was a final betrayal too, and it came from the kind of devotion Eren had inspired. Floch, the most faithful of the Yeagerists, the man who had built a whole movement around the belief that Eren was a savior, would not let the Alliance stop the rumbling. He understood exactly what they meant to do, and he tried to prevent it, damaging the flying boat in a last, desperate attempt to keep Eren's march alive. Mikasa cut him down. The fanaticism that Eren had lit in his followers had turned, at the end, against the very people trying to save the world, and one of those followers had to die at the hands of Eren's oldest friend so that the world might have a chance. The numbers, when they are finally spoken plainly, are almost too large to feel. Over the course of 4 days, from the moment the Titans first set foot on the mainland, the march brought the complete destruction of the northern continent and devastated the lands beyond it. By the time the combined alliance of Paradis soldiers and Marleyan warriors managed to stop it, the rumbling had ended roughly 80% of all the human life on the planet. 4 out of every 5 people alive in the world were gone. Whole nations, whole languages, whole histories, erased in less time than it takes to cross a season. The boy from Shiganshina had done in 4 days what no war in the history of his world had ever come close to doing. What the rumbling revealed about Eren is the hardest truth this part of the story carries. He was not a man who killed because he did not understand what he was destroying. He understood it completely. He had sat among the people of Liberio and felt their humanity. He had been gentle with a child named Falco. He had looked into the faces of the enemy and seen, clearly, that they were people exactly like him, with families and fears and small, ordinary hopes. And he had killed them anyway, by the billions, knowing every bit of what he was ending. The empathy did not stop him. If anything, it made the choice darker, because it was made with open eyes. The rumbling is the fullest and final expression of his fall, the point at which the boy who wept over the cruelty of the world became the largest cruelty the world had ever produced. As the 4th day wore on, the Alliance closed the distance. Their flying boat carried them across the flattened, smoking land toward the front of the march, toward the monstrous spine and the small human face at the top of it. The people who loved Eren most were coming to reach him, and they were coming not to save him, but to end him, because ending him was the only way to save everyone else. The march had nearly finished its work. The world lay mostly in ruins, and the boy at the head of it all was about to be reached, at last, by his friends, for one final conversation that would explain everything and excuse nothing. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Eren freed the giants, destroyed the army that threatened his people, and then chose to keep marching, ending 4 out of every 5 lives on the planet over 4 days, while the world's bitterest enemies joined hands to stop him. His oldest friends came to reach him, not to save him, but to end him. The final part follows that last conversation, the choice that freed everyone, and what the whole long fall of Eren Yeager truly meant. Section 10. The Last Conversation. The flying boat carried the Alliance across a world that no longer looked like a world. Below them stretched a flattened, smoking ruin where cities and forests and farmland had been only days before. Scrubbed away by the march, the ground left gray and broken under a sky thick with steam. Ahead of them, at the front of that endless line of giants, rose the thing they had come to reach. The monstrous founding titan moved forward on its great spine, and high upon it, small and almost lost against the vastness of the body, was the face of the boy they had all once known. The people who loved Eren most had come the whole length of a dying world to find him, and they had come to kill him. Reaching him was its own desperate battle. The previous holders of the Titan powers, the dead given shape once more by Ymir's will, rose up to defend Eren, and the bodies of countless Titans clung to the Founder's frame. The Alliance threw everything it had left at that wall of flesh. Armin gave up his own human form, transforming into the colossal Titan, and detonating in a blast meant to tear open the Founder's body and clear a path. Soldiers and warriors who had spent years trying to kill one another now fought side by side across the back of a walking god, falling one after another, spending their lives to buy a few more meters of progress. Levi, broken in body but not in will, found his way at last to Zeke, the brother whose plan had set so much of this in motion, and he ended him, keeping a vow he had carried since the deaths of the comrades Zeke had slaughtered. Beneath all the fighting lay a single hard truth about how this could end. Eren's true body, the human heart of the whole monstrous thing, lay hidden within the mouth of the founding titan, fixed to the end of a long spine. To stop the rumbling, someone had to reach that body and take Eren's life. And the story had been arranging, quietly and across 2,000 years, exactly who that someone would be. It would be Mikasa, the girl who had followed Eren since childhood, who had loved him without condition through everything he became, was the one the whole design had been waiting for. Before the end came, Eren reached out to Armin one last time, pulling his oldest friend into the timeless place outside the world so that the two of them could speak. This conversation is the heart of everything, the place where the mask finally came off, and it is worth moving through slowly. Armin came to him not as an enemy and not quite as a friend, but as someone who needed, before it was over, to understand. Armin asked him why. Eren did not hide behind anything. He admitted plainly that he had caused the rumbling, that he had killed most of the people in the world, that the blood of billions was on him, and he did not pretend otherwise. There was no excuse offered, no claim that he had been forced. He owned it. And then came the strangest and most human admission of all, the one that has divided everyone who has heard it since. When pressed on why, truly why, he had done such a thing, Eren could not fully answer. He said that he did not entirely know. He said that he had simply kept moving forward, that some pull he could not name had driven him on, that he had wanted to do it without being able to explain the want. For a story built around a character of fierce conviction, this was a startling thing to hear from him. The boy who had always seemed to know exactly what he wanted confessed at the end that he did not understand his own deepest reason. This is one of the places the story leaves genuinely open, refusing to hand over a clean motive, and it was almost certainly built that way on purpose. Underneath that confession, Eren laid out the reasons he could name, and they were tangled together in a way that made him neither hero nor simple villain. He had wanted to protect Paratus and the people he loved, and by destroying so much of the outside world, he had bought his island time and safety it could not have won any other way. He had also, in a cold and calculated kindness, arranged for his friends to be the ones who stopped him, so that they would be remembered as the heroes who saved the world from the Eldian devil, so that the hatred aimed at their people might soften, and they might live out their lives as something other than monsters. He had needed the rumbling to bring the world's enemies and his own people together against a common threat. And he had needed, for reasons tied to the very source of the Titan power, to create the exact moment in which Ymir could finally be freed. All of those reasons were real, and beneath all of them sat the one he could not explain. The simple, terrible fact that he had wanted the world flattened, that the empty ruin matched some warped picture of freedom he carried inside himself, and that he would have done it regardless of fate or duty or anyone's plan. Armin asked the question that the friends had all been asking for years. Why had he not talked to them, told them, let them try to find another way? Eren's answer was quiet and devastating. He said he could not risk it because he knew they might have changed his mind. He had hidden his whole plan from the people closest to him precisely because their love and their reason might have stopped him. And stopping was the one thing he would not allow. The last walls inside him came down then. Eren, who had spent years cold and distant and unreachable, broke in front of his oldest friend. He confessed his love for Mikasa, a love he had buried under everything else. And he confessed something uglier alongside it. He admitted that he did not want her to ever move on after he was gone, that some selfish part of him wished she would carry him in her heart for the rest of her life and never love anyone else. The boy who had given everything for an idea of freedom revealed at the end that he was bound, more than anyone, by his own small and human attachments. He wept. He thanked Armin. And then, because he could not let the world know what he had truly felt, he erased the entire conversation from Armin's mind, so that his friend would carry no memory of it until after Eren was already dead. One more truth Eren shared in that final talk reached all the way back to the beginning of the Titans. He revealed the real nature of Ymir Fritz, the ancient girl who had given him her power. Ymir had not been waiting 2,000 years for Eren. She had been waiting for Mikasa. Long ago, Ymir had loved the king who enslaved and abused her, and that love had bound her to obey his bloodline even after death, for 20 centuries, unable to let go. What she had been waiting for all that time was to see someone in her exact situation make a different choice. She needed to witness a person who loved another with their whole being choose to let that person go, even at the cost of their own heart. Mikasa loved Eren absolutely. Eren had become a monster, and if Mikasa could choose to kill him anyway for the sake of the world, then Ymir would finally understand that love does not require slavery, and she could free herself at last. So the design closed, exactly as it had been built to. Mikasa fought her way to the mouth of the founding Titan. She found Eren's body fixed to the long spine, his head among the bone and flesh. And she did the hardest thing the story ever asked of anyone. She severed his head from the Titan, ending his life, and then she held that head close and kissed him, saying goodbye to the boy she had loved since she was a child. The boy who had once wrapped a scarf around her neck and made her feel for the first time that the world might be warm. She killed the person she loved most to save everyone else, and she did it with love rather than hatred, which was the entire point. Ymir, watching from the timeless place, understood at last. The chains of 2,000 years fell away. The ancient girl who had served in silence for so long was finally free, and she smiled, and she released the power that had run through every Titan since the dawn of her servitude. The source dried up. Across the ruined world, every Titan dissolved into dust and steam. The marching giants collapsed, the wall Titans crumbled, and everyone who had been transformed into a Titan turned back into a human being, naked and confused and alive. The curse that had defined the world for 2 millennia lifted in an instant. The subjects of Ymir would never again become monsters. The thing that had started everything, the power that had built the walls and fed the wars and made Eren what he was, simply ended. Eren was dead. Mikasa carried his severed head down out of the wreckage of the founder, cradling it, and the rumbling stopped with the boy who had begun it. Roughly 80% of the world's people were gone, an absence too vast to grieve all at once. But the remaining fifth survived. And they survived because the people who loved Eren had chosen to end him rather than let him finish. The most loving act in the whole story was an act of killing, and the most important freedom was the freedom one bound soul found by watching another refuse to be bound. The parallel between the two women at the center of the ending carries the story's deepest idea. Ymir had spent 2,000 years enslaved by her love for a man who had hurt her, unable to imagine that love and freedom could exist apart. Mikasa, faced with the same impossible bond, loving a man who had become a horror, chose to honor her love and her conscience both, by letting him go. The thing that freed an entire people from the Titan curse was a single person deciding that loving someone did not mean obeying them unto the end of the world. In a story obsessed with freedom, the truest freedom shown was the freedom to choose, even when the choice breaks your heart. The aftermath was quiet in a way that suited a sleep-soft telling. Mikasa took Eren's head and buried it beneath a particular tree, the same kind of tree where the children of Shiganshina had once napped together in better days, before any of them knew what the world really was. She stood at the small grave with the red scarf Eren had given her long ago still around her neck. A bird flew down and, in a gesture that echoed the very first kind thing Eren ever did for her, took the loose ends of the scarf and wrapped them gently around her, as if the boy who had chased flight and freedom his whole life had come back for a moment in the only form that suited him. The land began, slowly, to heal. Grass returned. The tree grew. Over the long years that followed, a forest rose up and engulfed the place where Eren was buried, and the world went on without him. The peace that followed was not clean, and the story made a deliberate point of refusing to pretend otherwise. The survivors did not learn to live in harmony. War continued. Paradis remained an island surrounded by people who feared and hated it, and the threat of further conflict never fully lifted. The cycle of hatred that Eren had tried to end by becoming its greatest expression did not end. It only paused and then resumed, in the way that human conflict has always resumed. The work closes on this bitter, honest note, declining the comfort of a world made whole, and that refusal is one of the things that has kept people arguing about it ever since. Standing back from the whole of it, the shape of Eren's fall becomes clear, and it returns to the single word he carried from the very first scene: freedom. As a boy, he wanted only to be free, to step beyond the walls, to see the ocean, to live without a cage. By the end, he may have been the least free person in the entire story. He was bound by a future he had glimpsed and could not turn away from. He was bound by a compulsion he could not name, even in his final moments. He was bound, most of all, by the cycle of hatred he had spent his life inside. The cycle that turned a grieving child into a soldier into an infiltrator into the monster that rises over the wall. The victim became the perpetrator. The boy who hated the creatures that ate his mother became the creature that ate the world. And the freedom he chased so fiercely was won, in the end, only for his friends and his island, and only through the ultimate unfreedom of billions of strangers, and through his own death at the hands of the girl who loved him. The chain that led there can be traced cleanly, each link pulling the next. A child made a vow of vengeance over his mother's body. The power that was supposed to fulfill that vow turned out to be the power to become the very thing he hated, blurring the line between Eren and monster from the first transformation. A basement full of his father's writings then killed the simple world he had believed in, replacing the mindless enemy with a human one, and leaving his enormous hatred with nowhere to rest except the whole of humanity. A vision of the future, seen through a handshake, may have trapped him on a path he had already watched himself walk, raising a question of choice the story never answers. From there, the descent quickened. He vanished into the enemy's homeland and learned to love the people he meant to kill. He rose over their festival the way a monster once rose over his own town. He claimed the most powerful force in the world from a girl who had waited 2,000 years for a kindness, and he used it to end the world, until the people who loved him ended him in turn, freeing everyone, including the ancient soul whose enslavement had begun the whole tragedy. The question of whether Eren was ever truly free to choose any of this is the one the story most deliberately leaves open. He saw the future and walked into it, which can be read as a man with no choice at all, a prisoner performing a script. He also insisted that he would have done it regardless, which can be read as a man who chose freely and simply used his strange power to confirm a decision already made in his heart. Both readings have strong support, and the work itself does not settle between them. The truth of Eren Yeager's freedom is held permanently open, and that openness is not a flaw to be solved, but the very heart of what the story is asking. What the fall of Eren Yeager says about the world that produced it reaches well beyond the story itself. It is a portrait of how victims become perpetrators, of how the grief of one generation becomes the cruelty of the next, of how the desire to protect the people you love can be used to justify any horror at all if the fear runs deep enough. It shows the way hatred reproduces itself, passing from a boy who lost his mother to a girl who lost her friends in the very attack his hatred created. And it shows freedom and love curdling into their opposites, a dream of open skies becoming a flattened world, a love that should have set people free, instead binding them across 2,000 years. The story holds all of this up without preaching, and it asks its audience to sit with the discomfort of a hero who is also the greatest villain, and a villain who is also, achingly, still a frightened boy. The ending divided the people who followed the story, and that division is worth presenting honestly, because both sides are arguing in good faith. Many felt let down by it. They had followed a tale famous for its careful planning and its tight logic, and the final revelations, the muddled confession that Eren did not fully know why, the sudden weight given to his feelings for Mikasa, the world that learned nothing and returned to war, struck them as a softer and less satisfying conclusion than the story had earned. Others defended it with equal passion.
They saw in that same muddiness an honest portrait of how real human catastrophe actually works. Driven by motives even the perpetrators cannot fully name, ending not in clean resolution, but in exhausted, imperfect survival. They saw the refusal to break the cycle of hatred as the most truthful thing the story could have done, a mirror held up to a history that has never managed to break the cycle either. Both readings have lived on, side by side, and the argument between them is part of the story's afterlife. What almost no one disputes is the rarity of what was attempted. Telling the story of a beloved hero who becomes the architect of genocide, and doing it so gradually that the audience can never find the single moment where they should have stopped loving him, is a difficult and uncomfortable thing to pull off. The fall of Eren Yeager works because it never lets anyone fully off the hook. Not Eren, not his friends, not the world that hated his people, and not the part of the audience that understood, somewhere along the way, exactly why he did it. He remains one of the most argued over figures in his medium because he refuses to be sorted into a simple box. He is a boy who wanted to see the ocean, and a man who drowned the world. And the terrible truth the story tells is that those two people were always the same person, walking the same path, from the very first time he looked up at the wall and dreamed of what lay beyond it. The boy who wanted to be free got his ocean. He crossed it, and he found on the other side only more war. And he answered that war by becoming the largest cage the world had ever known. And then he died so that the people he loved could live outside it. The fall of Eren Yeager is the story of a dream of freedom that consumed everything it touched, including the dreamer, and it ends where it began, under a quiet tree, with a scarf and a bird, and the long silence of a world learning to go on. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.